Our next speaker was going to be Annalie, but Rachel Tropea will very kindly be delivering her paper, so please welcome Rachel.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't mind if you take my photo, just make sure it's my left side, my good side. All right. Okay, so yeah, I'm Rachel and I'm presenting this on behalf of Annalie, and she's written it in the first person, so I'm just going to read it. Hi everyone, thanks for attending this session today. I'm sorry that I'm unable to be there in person to answer your questions, but here's my email address and my Twitter handle in case you'd like to get in touch. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet, the Noongar people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are in the room today. My name is Annalie de Villiers, and today's paper is presenting on the research project I did as part of my Masters through Monash University a couple of years ago. This research project considered digital life story work in reference to Aboriginal Australian children who were removed from their families and placed in care. In terms of introduction and situating myself, I am a South African who has lived in Australia since 2001. Since 2014, I've had the good fortune of working with a number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations through consulting and research projects. Okay, Kevin Rudd delivered a formal apology to the stolen generations in 2008, stating that a new page in Australian history had been turned and that the injustices of the past should never be repeated. Astonishingly, since this apology was delivered, the removal rate of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children has increased by 65%. Some are referring to these children as the new stolen generation. There are currently more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in out-of-home care than ever before. The removal of children from their families and their communities results in a disruption of their sense of identity as both individuals and as members of their Aboriginal community. In acknowledgement of the damage these disruptions cause, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Child Placement Principle was developed. This principle aims to ensure that children taken into out-of-home care remain within their community. However, as of 2014, this was only achieved in 37.5% of cases, meaning that the majority of these children and youth are still removed not only from their family, but also the cultural knowledge and cultural practices of their community. This loss of personal identity and knowledge and connection to culture is further compounded by the fact that many children removed from their families are the latest in a succession of generations that have been removed. The following was said by a 15-year-old Aboriginal girl in care about finding records about her mother. There was photos of when she was little and when mum was in foster care, stuff from the department. Her mother was in foster care, so her background is nearly the same as mine. My research project started out by looking at the current uses of life story work with Aboriginal children in care. Life story work is based on narrative identity theory and typically involves a child or young person working through an identity resource, such as the example on the screen, with an adult, someone who can help that young person make sense of their experiences and help them to create a narrative of their life. Life story work is a technique which is commonly recommended within the care sector. However, in reality, the social work sector is chronically under-resourced, and carers are like the rest of us. They have too much work to do with too little time. Furthermore, many preteens and teens disdain life story work resources as being for kids. It was found, for instance, that many preteens and teens would refuse to use a life story work resource and would instead show counsellors, social workers and carers photos and videos on their phones in order to illustrate and reflect upon their lives. This has resulted in an increased uptake in digital life story work in recent years. Researchers are currently trying to figure out whether the uptake of information and communication technologies within life story work is a potential solution to, one, youth's disdain for more traditional life story work resources, and 2, carers' lack of resources and time. Research has indicated that usage of mobile technologies among Aboriginal teens is higher than for non-Aboriginal teens. As such, there have also been a couple of research initiatives in recent years into how the use of information and communication technologies can be better aligned with Aboriginal cultural knowledge protocols. It won't be surprising to you, however, that these research initiatives found that while the development of the desired technology was doable, it was the long-term preservation of what's produced that stumps everyone. This brings us to the issues which I identified through a review of the literature. A review of the literature identified the following concerns. Firstly, narrative identity theory, which underpins life story work, is based on Western ideas of identity, which may or may not align with Aboriginal views. Life story work is also based on a Western model of child development, which has been previously critiqued as being out of alignment with Aboriginal model of child development. I feel it's important to note these issues, although as archivists, particularly non-Aboriginal archivists, there is very little we can contribute within that space except to advocate for Indigenous-led initiatives to support the children and youth being removed from their families. The final issue is one which we might be able to contribute to. In recognition of the fundamental importance of these youths' records to their sense of identity and long-term well-being, initiatives within the digital life story workspace need to be informed by principles, technologies, and governance structures which support their long-term preservation. My research project therefore asked, what are the fundamental principles which would need to underline the development and long-term preservation of digital life story work for Aboriginal children and youth in care? To this end, I interviewed 6 subject matter experts. Due to a variety of factors, the major limitation of this study was that I was only able to interview one Aboriginal Australian subject matter expert. Please note that the findings of this project should therefore be seen as suggestions for future avenues of thought and study only. I used roughly the same questions for each interviewee, and the responses I received varied so drastically that I found it useful to analyse their interview transcripts through natural language processing analysis. The blue words down the y-axis are the terms I was cross-checking transcripts for. The x-axis denotes the length of the interviewed transcript. The blue dashes in the diagram denote how often and when each phrase was used within the interview. This was useful both in terms of analysis and also to communicate the point that each individual brought their own perspectives to bear on the topic of digital life story work, and any ventures down this path in the future would be greatly strengthened by a collaborative approach. For example, some interviewees emphasised the role of various people within this space, such as the one on this slide, whereas others spoke most about technicalities and systems. I also analysed each transcript for common themes and concepts. This thematic analysis method determined that concepts of information security, privacy, trust and control were discussed within each interview. Okay. Both the literature and the interviews pointed to the need for a personal digital archive for each child in care, as the long-term preservation of something like digital life story work, which is controlled and owned by a child, could not be supported in existing record-keeping structures in the care sector. Work has previously been done to look at whether a personal digital archive could be possible. A particularly relevant project called the Virtual Locker Project was completed in 2014. Unfortunately, though, the findings of that project have not been published to date. Through interviews with a couple of the project's chief investigators, however, I was able to determine that whilst a personal digital archive for each child in care is completely feasible in terms of technological requirements, it was impossible because, and here I quote Gavin McCarthy, there was no governance fabric that would underpin such a project for the period of time that would be required to meet the ethical and other personal obligations that would go with building a service like that and the expectations that would go with it. This issue remains unresolved. However, projects within this space hopefully continue the conversation and advocacy work required for the implementation of such initiatives in the future. This project resulted in a list of the principles required for such a personal digital archive, relating in particular to trust, agency, and responsibility. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to lead you through each of those. Instead, I'll show you the proposed model, which also resulted from this project and represents some of the identified principles. On this slide, you'll see the proposed structure of a personal digital archive for Aboriginal children and youth in out-of-home care. In addition to the child, only the social workers and carers would have the ability to add information into the child's personal digital archive. The social workers would be able to insert records related to the various systems the child functions within, for example, the school system. The carers would be able to insert records gathered through their interactions with the child or youth and their families and community. The child would be able to insert records of their choosing into the archive, including records generated through their use of social media and through purpose-built interactive resources such as digital life story work resource. Okay. You'll note that the personal digital archive is segmented. This is to denote that sections within the archive would have different access restrictions. Most importantly, one of these sections would be entirely private to the child. A resource such as this would help to resolve many of the record-keeping issues within the Australian care sector, which one social worker has cited as a complete nightmare to navigate for all of us. It's conversations like the one we're having now and the work of people like Joanne Evans that will keep activating towards the improvement of record-keeping systems and practices within the care sector, resulting in resolving rather than exacerbating some of the identity issues commonly faced by Aboriginal children in care today. And there are Annalee's references. Thank you. Done.